Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Jeffrey V. Guns. I'm senior pastor of Second Calvary Baptist Church in Norfolk, Virginia. This evening, I'm joined by my brother, Bishop John Eric Guns, senior pastor of St. Paul Missionary Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Florida, and a longtime friend, Dr. Sheridan Nelson, senior pastor of Abyssinia Baptist Church in Norfolk, Virginia. Thanks for joining us this evening. Tonight and next Tuesday, we're going to spend some time talking about ministry in this post-COVID-19 era. Right now, we're all tired of the virus, just tired of everything that's been going on, tired of dealing with the isolation, tired of dealing with the separation and all of the challenges we've had to overcome with this global pandemic. And so we want to kind of take up this subject tonight and then next Tuesday. So how do you proceed to continue doing ministry, knowing that this pandemic is going to be with us for the next 6 to 10 months? There's a vaccine that's come out, announcement about the vaccine, but we all know that the numbers are going up. And it does not seem to be an end in sight. And so as a pastor, how do you think about ministry over the next 6 to 10 months? Here's another question. What transitions, what are the kinds of things that churches need to be doing in order to make sure that their congregations will be able to thrive in the post-COVID-19 era? We all know that things are going to change. When we look around at the world that we're living in, a lot of things are changing. Nearly 100,000 restaurants have gone out of business. And at the same time, we all know that there are churches that are going to go out of business as well. And this third question, what is there about this period of change that you believe will be a permanent fixture in the years to come? We'll get to that question probably next week. And so over the course of these two evenings, myself, Dr. Nelson, Bishop Guns, John Eric Guns, we're going to be talking about the consequences of the pandemic, the kinds of mistakes that churches and pastors and parachurch organizations have made, and then what are the possibilities? What are the opportunities that that churches have, and that your ministry will have going forward? So let's just kind of jump right in. So Bishop Guns and Dr. Nelson, when the pandemic first hit, what was your initial reaction? That's the first question. What was your initial reaction? And when did you begin to realize that this may not come to an end real soon? I know in Virginia, it was May the third Sunday in March. We all thought that we'd be coming back real soon. But March turned to April, April turned to May, and it just went on and on and on. So what was your first reaction? What did you first do?
Well, I know Dr. Guns, and thank you for calling us together. I think this is an excellent opportunity for us to come together to discuss some very important thoughts and themes that you have identified. And so thank you for convening us in this format. But my initial thought was, I think like so many others, was thinking it was only going to be temporarily, after many of us made that decision by the second Sunday or so in March to not gather physically in our corporate buildings and gather in church. We're only thinking at best this was going to be maybe a month at best, not even thinking 30 to 60 or 90 days even out at that point. And so my initial thoughts and feelings was shell shocked as the months progressed. And we found ourselves going from a month to 30 days, 30 turned into 60 and so forth. And now here we are.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really shocked that and never would have thought or even fathomed the thought that we would not be gathering physically in our buildings and sanctuaries for corporate worship this long.
Yeah, 9 months almost. So Bishop John Guns, same question. what was your initial reaction to when the pandemic hit?
I think like most of us, we were planning to go back Easter. You know? And when we all found ourselves preaching virtually on Easter, we said, dog, Jesus didn't get up, right?
Yeah.
Because we obviously didn't get up.
Absolutely.
You know, so, you know, I think for me personally, I was in denial until Easter. And then Easter, I just kind of made a decision that I'm going to have to figure out how to be faithful in this, even if I don't like this, I'm going to have to be faithful in this. And I'll be very transparent. I think I found myself deciding that I was going to do everything in my power to accomplish whatever it was that God had called me to do, even if I couldn't resolve the pandemic. I could at least stay faithful to God and to whatever assignment He had given to me.
I think that for me, my initial reaction was I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a plan. I didn't really know what to do. We had been streaming now for several years, had done online giving, but I really didn't know what to do. I didn't have a plan, didn't know how to address the issues, didn't really have a plan for making the ministry continue to thrive. And I didn't really know how I was going to make that adjustment. And fortunately, you know, just being around some really talented young people who had really had a real good idea about social media and those kinds of things really kind of helped me to get focused. But initially, I just didn't know which way to go. Didn't know what to do. I spent some time, like you, in denial, not sure about how this was going to work out. And I think I may have been slightly depressed a little, just trying to figure this thing out and trying to figure out which way to go. But we already had a foundation. And so that foundation was what we were able to really kind of build on. We had been making some plans to do virtual Christian education courses. And so we were able to make that pivot the very next week, but everything else was just kind of trial and error. You know, when we think about this, and let's just kind of dive in on this first topic. You know, we're going to talk about consequences, mistakes, and possibilities. And so, what have been some of the repercussions for pastors and churches and organizations, parachurch organizations? What do you think have been some of the repercussions that churches and pastors have had to deal with?
I think, honestly, the first thing was preaching. I think preaching changed. I think many of us found out how codependent we were upon the congregational response. Personally, I kind of enjoyed it, and I still kind of enjoy it. I mean, I miss the congregation, but I don't necessarily miss them for the sake of preaching. I miss them for the sake of fellowship and koinonia, community. But I mean, I think, and both of you know this, I jumped right in and started thinking of stuff to do. You know, I wasn't the guy sitting around depressed. I didn't become, you know what? And if I became depressed, it was because I couldn't leave the house. But outside of that, I turned my chair. I have a lounging chair. I turned it into the best, most creative space I've been in 20 years. And I found myself excited about the opportunity to dream. So I think, you know, that, and then, you know, I mean, I know you too well, you know, right now Sheridan is my pastor, because he pastored the church I grew up in, so he's our pastor. And you're my big brother, and I've always told people I thought was one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. And so when I had a conversation with you, and you were like, "Hey, man, I don't know what's going on, but we gonna do what we do." So I think in the end, for me, it didn't intimidate me. The fighter in me came out, and I decided that I was going to lead this church through this, and and it became an exciting time of creativity, even while we were dealing with all of the uncertainty and the grief and the loss and the uncertainty. I just found it as an opportunity to do a different type of ministry,
Yeah, that's an interesting point. We'll come back to that, especially talking about dealing with the grief and the loss and the number of members maybe who've lost loved ones. Dr. Nelson, when you think about the repercussions, what are some of the repercussions that you saw?
Well, I think in terms of, as I begin to think about that in a very real sense, and especially as you chronicled it, when you think about all of the disruptions, both, from our way of life and all of the systems and infrastructures that we're accustomed to, and we see the impact that it's having on our economy, on, from retail and restaurants, from healthcare, all of our major industries. And then when you begin to zoom in on that reality of how this COVID virus and this pandemic has caused disruptions within the church, it began to just really challenge our infrastructures and our systems, in terms of some of us were maybe able to make a little better transition than others in terms of being able to do ministry in this digital context, but our systems got challenged very and got exposed in a lot of ways, to us not having the proper infrastructures and systems in place to be able to facilitate not being physically able to be in people's company and to gather. And so I immediately saw a weakness in our infrastructure in terms of the systems that we definitely needed to grab a hold of very quickly to begin to tighten, strengthen, to be able to stay connected, to keep people engaged, and to shepherd people from a digital space.
Yeah, I want to come back to that. We'll come back and talk a little bit about some of these disruptions and things. But Bishop, you brought up a really important piece, and that's that whole grief, loss, emotional trauma. Dealing with members. At one period in our congregation, we had a period where it was almost like every day I was getting a call from a member who had lost a family member, or loved ones. Had one family that lost 5 members of their family to the novel coronavirus. Another family that lost 3 members, 4 members. And we had started this everyday prayer vigil. Started out with a short list, writing down the names of a list of people. And the next thing you know, I had a growing list that had almost 300 names on it. In a matter of weeks, just dealing with the loss and the members. So how did you deal with your members who were dealing with the novel coronavirus, the death, the grief? And what would you say to pastors who may be just really struggling, trying to figure out how to deal with this? Because, they say the worst is still yet to come.
Right.
And, so how do you deal with members? And what would you say to pastors or leaders that, hey, this is how you deal with this constant death?
Yeah, I'll let you answer that first.
You look like you got the answer. Dr. Nelson.
Look like you got the answer.
I think for me personally, it has really made me go the extra mile in terms of when we start talking about how this pandemic is causing us to reinvent ourselves, and to revisit, some of the basic blocking and tackling practices of the church. I think, it has really caused us to really turn back to just basic pastoral care and heightening our care for our congregation. Just today, I have made it a practice of mine to call seniors, just today when I was at the church, something that, I will admit, some things that I had gotten away from because, you would see them a lot in the corporate gatherings. But now being more intentional in terms of how we care for our people and care for our congregation, and building those systems to help us facilitate that, knowing that a lot of people are in isolation, you're not seeing and coming in contact with people on a day or even weekly basis. And so I think, it is really causing us to revisit what are we doing as it relates to pastoral and congregational care.
I think go ahead, Bishop.
No, I was gonna say I think D is dead on it. I honestly I think that there was an opportunity for us to correct our codependency on facilities, and because so many people have invested so much into the facility per se, then a lot of us started to discover that it was never the facility that defined us. It was the culture that defined us. And since most of us were more concerned about building the building and not always creating the culture of connection and the culture of care, I think it gave us an opportunity to reinvent. And I agree with you. But I think also, coupled with that, it has really given us an opportunity to rethink why we do church. And it has really kind of forced us to return, and D hit it, man, to return to the place where we are focused on building healthy disciples who can weather storms.
Right.
There was a season our preaching was, get your stuff and this your season. And preaching went from get your stuff, get your season is this is your season. You better learn how to live victoriously in it. And victory wasn't the new car and the new house. Victory was the ability to stay faithful to God in the midst of the pain, the suffering, and the disappointment. Because every week this kept going or is going, believers are having to make up their minds whether they want to trust God or whether they want to trust the systems that we've been, depending upon, the economic system. And now, even now, here we are, after an election that we think is good, and the people in the election board in Wayne County won't even certify the election because the world we live in this country is proving to us that just because you have a vote doesn't mean you have a voice. And so I think people are discovering a different need for God than they had before. I think we needed the God who blessed us. Now we need the God who keeps us. And whatever that looks like for people is what I think many people are.
Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 13, and I want to just kind of pick up on something that Dr. Nelson Sheridan mentioned. He says, "For as the body is one and hath many members, and all the bodies of that one body, being many, are one body, so also is Christ." And then later on in this chapter, he says, and he talks about the need for the body and the members of the body to really kind of take care of each other. And I often remember something my mother used to say, God bless her, so that the church is a body ministry.
Right.
And so you know something about system. And one of the things that I'm really thankful for is leaders, deacons and deaconesses and elders and ministry leaders who really kind of came alongside and started picking up some of this caring ministry, the capacity to care for people in their ministries, to reach out to them, the brethren who show up every Sunday at the church, the building itself, who are there to do pop-up prayers for people. We invite people to come by. The deacons will pray for you in your car. You don't have to get out. But understanding that the pastor can't possibly, you really realize how strong your systems are, in your caring systems are. And I think you mentioned that, Bishop Gunn, about the capacity to build. You need koinonia, but you also need to have that system when you are scattered, like we are, where people can kind of come alongside you and help you provide the care that you need, because the truth be told, we're all trying to figure out how to make sure that we can keep this thing moving in the right direction, and keep people engaged. And that's a lot of energy, in thinking about it. And so when you think about that scripture that Paul says, the body is not one member, but many. How do you continue to engage your leaders in this body ministry?
Hey, you're my pastor. You go first.
In terms of keeping us engaged in that is, I think, what has been really powerful to see is Dr. Guns, Jeffrey Guns, as you just mentioned, in terms of some of the things you all have in place, where some of that activities and things that your deacons are engaged in, your deaconesses are engaged in. In this season, it has totally forced us to focus on that. It is, in this season, we have nothing else to focus on but that. And I think all of the things that causes the church universal to turn inward, we have now been made to turn solely outward, to focus on others, to focus on community, and not focus on so much that suffocates the power of the church, because we're so internally driven. In terms of when you hear preachers talk in our conversations, it's about the crowds that are gathering inside the buildings. It's about the budget. It's about buildings. It's about everything that is internally driven. But now this pandemic has forced us not just literally out of the building, but ministry focused us, caused us to turn externally. And I think that's where we're going to really see some powerful transformation if we don't succumb with the need to just try to get back in the building, but keep the external focus. I think we'll see some powerful transformations in our churches and in our ministries, and a resurgence if we keep this same energy of what you just mentioned, like what is happening in Second Calvary right now. If we keep this same momentum, same energy, same focus, I think we're going to see a resurgence of, in particularly, the African American church, in this country.
It's interesting, and tonight I'm known as Jeffrey Gunn's baby brother. So I just want everybody to know, please refer to me as Jeffrey Gunn's baby brother, and refer to me as a member of Apostolic Baptist Church. Jeremy Nelson is my pastor. Giving honor to God and to my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and all the same. Now, honestly, I think the genius of this season, because it's funny, I think our pessimism prolonged our ineffectiveness. I think that because we were pessimistic for so long, that our pessimism prolonged our ineffectiveness, and it made us programmatically paralyzed.
Yeah, that's good.
I think we missed some incredible opportunities early on to kind of carve out some space to do work. What's funny is that, and I'll say this because I'm Black. The Black church was slow coming to the game anyway. Because this whole virtual thing was happening years before many of us thought, because we had a camera and we told people we gonna be on Facebook Live at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, and you can watch us in January and December and November. Then all of a sudden it was all we had, and we discovered we didn't have qualitative equipment, or if we had it, we didn't have trained people who understood the climate and the culture of what the virtual world really required. And so now here we are forced to do it. And I think the opportunity to be creative and to offer people what we maybe were not offering them before became a vast opportunity. You know, I've chosen not to be a cynic in this season. I really made a decision, D, that Ivan was going to be as positive and as creative as I could be. So early on, we had Women's Month, we had Men's Month, and we did it in April. We did it in May. Y'all know, out of it came seminary on Sundays. I just decided that there were way too many opportunities. And then I discovered that God wasn't outside of this.
Right.
God was in it. And I think our theology had to shift to now start dealing with the God who allowed it versus the God who would fix it.
That's good.
And so because we were now serving the God who wouldn't fix it, while we were doing we prayed 42 straight days at 12 o'clock noon. One of y'all was on the prayer.
I was on it. I led it.
We prayed so much until we just knew God was going to hear us. I promise you, after the middle of May, and he ain't moved, we had to, I had, you know what? I said, you know what? I'm going to stop asking God to fix it. And I'm going to start asking God to fix me. I'm going to start asking God to show me what ministry opportunities is in this season. Because if you don't fix it, God, you must be up to something. And I just got to begin to discern what you're up to.
Well, that's an interesting thing. We'll take up that in real fuller detail next week in terms of just kind of talking about some of the possibilities. But let me just kind of share this scripture with you, because you mentioned something that I think that when you take a look at the scriptures and you look at the history of the Christian church and the growth of the Christian church, it's always been in the midst of pain and persecution that the church has grown. So in Acts chapter 8, it says that when Paul was consenting to the death of Stephen, that there was a great persecution, and that the believers were scattered through the regions of Judea and Samaria. Everyone left Jerusalem except the apostles. And so everyone has left the building but the pastor.
Wow.
And the apostles, the disciples, are scattered throughout the region. And so here then is one of the consequences of the pandemic is the fact that the church has scattered, and the apostles were the primary anchor holding the church together, because they were at the seat of where the church came to life. And so the church building itself kind of represents a Jerusalem. The apostles are still there, but the disciples have scattered, doing ministry in a number of places. I just want to kind of shift for a moment, and just because this is a great conversation, and I'm really getting some really really powerful thoughts from you. When you think about everything that's been disrupted, and I want to just kind of rattle off some things. Last year this time, I was coming back from Turkey. So one of the things that's really been disruptive has been my travel, my ministry travel. I usually did about 4 or 5 international trips every year, going to Kenya, just different places. I haven't been to the airport since, listen, have not been to the airport since last November. It's been a year since I've been to the airport. I've been forced to cancel every flight that I've taken. And so you have this huge disruption of everything, the economy, travel, healthcare. And I think, Dr. Nelson, you mentioned that about healthcare. Our whole political system has been disrupted. Everything that we knew has been disrupted, and the church has been disrupted. And just think about this for a moment. These 5 areas that I'm going to just share, and then you all can just kind of jump in and talk about these. The weekly worship gatherings have been completely disrupted. I had someone say to me just recently, they came to the church. I was preaching to an empty building, pretty much, with the exception of the all hands on deck deacons and my wife and 2 or 3 other folk and the media staff. And the person said, "Hey, it's like you weren't, it's like you weren't really preaching to the people who were there. You were preaching to the people in the camera." And I said, "Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm trying to preach to the folk in the camera." There are 4,232,000,000 people on the internet.
Wow.
That's the people that in addition to the folk when they come back to Second Calvary to worship, that's the audience.
Right.
That's that's Jesus said, "Go into all the world." He didn't say go into your building. He said, "Go into all the world." And so churches have to kind of think about it. So our normal business operations have been disrupted. Our meetings, our planning sessions in terms of these face-to-face gatherings, Christian education programs, the communal life of the congregation, everything that people kind of and Bishop John Guns, you mentioned this. Our church life revolved around our buildings, and
Right.
and once you're out of that building, how do you begin to think about all of these church disruptions, and then the possibility of, and I heard Tom Rainer mention this about repurposing your building.
Yeah.
Repurposing that space, doing something different with it. So what are the things that have been disrupted in your church life when you just think about it?
Dr. Jeffrey Guns with.
Either one of you all can, jump on that.
Okay. Well, I think it's all those things you just mentioned. And when you think about those disruptions, the weekly worship, and even, how you prep for those, weekly routines, and, from the rehearsals and all of the stuff that we know makes church now has totally been disrupted, right? Business operations, the planning sessions, and your Christian education program, your small group classes, and the communal life and the aspects of the church, all of that now has just been totally turned upside, have been turned upside down. And I think, in the piece that you put together, and I hope at some point for persons that may be tuned in to us that may want some follow-up, you have provided an excellent chronicle of the church disruptions and some of the things that we're talking about. And so I think it'd be a great resource to be able to put in some pastors and some church leaders' hands that you have put together that's kind of really guiding our discussions. But I think all of those disruptions that you've mentioned is all of us are trying to manage those disruptions, and are now, trying to get our footing of how we move forward with the disruptions that you have, so eloquently laid out. I believe you hit it right on the head with all of the things that have been disrupted in our church life, and how it's impacted us in significant ways.
Yeah, I think that I think that when I think about what's been disrupted in the church life. I walk into the church now, and it's just me and the staff of the people who are there, taking temperatures and all of that. And these disruptions have become, the disruption doesn't have to become a distraction.
Right.
And next week we'll have an opportunity to talk about opportunities, and we'll have a chance to talk about the kinds of shifts that churches need to be making. And I'll just preface that by saying that churches that want to be what they used to be will not become the congregations that God is calling them to be. If you go back and you take a look at Isaiah 43, where the Lord says he calls Israel to do, he says, I'm going to do a new thing. Behold, I'm doing something new. And God is always in the business of recreating and creating something new.
Mhm.
And the people of God have to become, and I know that, and this is something I get from my brother, about being sensitive to hearing,
Mhm.
hearing God's movement in this. That and our mother was saying, if you ever, if you would, when you would talk to her, her favorite line was, "What's the Lord saying to you now?"
Yes,
What's
sir.
the Lord saying to you?
Yes, Lord.
Who hadn't heard that No Quincy Guns? What's the Lord saying?
What is the Lord saying to you now? And I hear a voice, in the midst of all of this. What is the Lord saying to you now? And
Mhm.
It's funny, man. I think one of the most amazing things, and again, I just made a decision, and I've had conversations with both of you throughout this. I just made a decision that I'm gonna be optimistic in this. And it's funny because I think that, to me, one of the greatest one of the greatest disruptions, and I agree with D. Any pastor who, the PowerPoint that we're working from, Dr. Guns created, and it's amazing. I think one of the distractions for me that I saw was people putting pressure on me
hmm,
to take them back to a place that I no longer felt existed.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think sometimes as pastors we feel guilty we can't give people what they want
mhm.
because we're being demanded by God to give them what they need.
That church died.
That church is gone. And even if you go back to the building, you're going back with people who are going to be apprehensive about relating to each other.
Hmm.
You're going to go back to a place that for a season people are going to be wearing masks and sanitizing every time you say lift up your hands. There is a fear that has gripped particularly us
Hmm.
as a people, and that's why other churches have decided to go back. And it's funny, they tell us trust God, and we're saying trust science because I think,
Go ahead. I was just going to say, I think that that's a healthy thing, because
it is.
it's helped us to make sure that we can ensure the safety of our members. Um, as much as I'd like to gather with that several hundred people on Sunday morning, I also recognize that gathering can be deadly
Yeah.
at this point.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and there's a pastor friend that we have here in the city of Norfolk, that made the decision to go back. And when we were kind of just sidebar talking about it, he, said to me, Sheridan, where's your faith? And my reply to him was the same place my common sense is. They live in the same space. So my common sense and my faith, they live in the same house,
They
and
go
so
together. They date. And you want to know what's really, really interesting about this is that I think that our theology, especially in the Black church, now is able to house science.
Mhm.
You know, because maybe science is not the enemy to what we believe. Maybe it's a part of shaping what we believe so that we can effectively do the things that we are called to do in an ultimate way. And it's funny, you know, I've never been a great common sense guy. I've always said, no, common sense didn't go. But to me, I think it's about trusting the voice of God, even when the voice of God doesn't give you permission to do what your ego so desperately desires. I mean, it feels good to
Yeah.
have people say, preach, Reverend. But to
Right.
me, I'm now motivated by not so much their response to the sermon, but their openness to the voice of God as we are all transitioning and journeying through this time.
You know, there's a passage. Let me just read this passage from Proverbs 3.
You Bible tonight, sir.
Yeah, I mean.
You Bible tonight.
I
Hey,
mean,
D.
you know,
Hey, D. He didn't tell us bring those scriptures.
No,
you
no.
know, as guiding convener facilitator, it is my
The guiding convener. Okay, you are.
we stay on the we stay
You are the dean. You're the dean.
You are the D
grounded
of the
theologically.
form.
You know, there has to be a contextual scriptural relationship to every decision that we make. But here, Proverbs, and here's what it says. We know the scripture by heart. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. You know, trust. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take. And I think that the mistake that people make is that sometimes they think that God is speaking to them and they're talking to themselves and they're telling themselves what they want to hear. And they are allowing others to influence their thinking about this. You know, the Lord gives us good common sense. And I think you mentioned this, Dr. Nelson, about you know, common sense and you know, spiritual intuition. They all live in the same place, and you know, so the Lord is not going to lead us to do something that's going to put our members at risk. Now, I'm just you know, I'm just thinking that any God that would tell me to bring 800 people together and let them spread the novel coronavirus among themselves and dozens of them die is not a God that I want to serve, and certainly not one that I want to preach about. So I don't think, for me, it's not a matter of faith. It is a matter of wisdom and doing what is best to protect the people that I pastor, even sometimes if some of them disagree with the idea that maybe we don't need to come back. But you know, in your heart of hearts, that going back can be dangerous.
Right.
And it can be, and you can't allow yourself, and I think you're right, Bishop Guns, that you cannot allow people to put that kind of pressure on you. And I think some pastors have done that. Can we just make a shift real quick and just talk about, you know, 12 mistakes that churches and pastors have made. And I'll just mention a few of these, and then you all can jump in and provide some commentary about some of them. And I think the number one mistake that people have made is not taking this virus seriously, not taking it seriously. You know, second, miscalculations about the intensity of the spread. You know, not realizing that, you know, there is, even though you may not be impacted by it, you don't know who has it. And not establishing, and here's a real thing, why some churches are suffering financially, not establishing an electronic e-giving strategy for your congregation. So why don't y'all jump right in on that? We got about 15 more minutes that we're going to be talking, but I got these 12 things, and we want to kind of run through them real fast.
Yeah, the e-giving, electronic giving, I know is a big mistake that a lot of persons hadn't migrated to, and I think, you know, are seeing and feeling the impact of that for those that hadn't. And to that point, I would follow that by saying the failure to build creative approaches to ministry. a lot of us had gotten so dependent on allowing the building to do the work in terms of the gathering, but now we're seeing the failure to build creative approaches to ministry, and now we're seeing more creativity than we've seen in a long time in our churches. And then another mistake is not realizing the need to, to evolve, and with that mistake, I just want to say kudos to you, Dr. Jeffrey Guns, because even as a pastor now, how long have you been pastoring, Dr. Guns?
37 this church, 37 and a half years, almost 40 years.
Almost 40 years, and you are 71. Yeah. And the one thing I've always admired about you and even your ministry is that I've seen and watched and worked with you and been a part of the continuing evolution of Dr. Jeffrey Guns and the Second Calvary Church. And so I think we're seeing that's a huge mistake of pastors and churches that haven't continued to evolve in this season and in past seasons.
I think that I appreciate that. I'm gonna jump back on that and say that we come from a family of where my dad was just a real innovator, but a lot of some of my ideas I have to admit I get from my brother. As an older guy.
Jeffrey Guns' baby brother. Give me the right title. I'm Jeffrey Guns' baby brother.
When you're an older pastor, you have old ideas. Old people have old ideas. They think old, and they act old. And I've had to surround. And one of the things I was wise enough to do, listening to my brother, he told me something once. He forgot he ever said it, but I heard it. And it made a lot of sense to me. But one of the things I've tried to do is to surround myself with young people who think evolutionary, who are able to help me to think futuristically about ministry. And we'll be sharing some of those guys. And so I really appreciate that, but the failure and John, you mentioned this earlier about not evolving. You got to evolve. Mm-hmm. If you're not changing, you're dying.
Well, it's interesting. I think one of the keys, and I think it's been referred to, is also your circle of relationships in ministry.
Sure.
If most of us discovered that our circle was not built for change, it was built for compliments. Mm. And because most of us love the celebration of our peers, far too many, and I'll admit it, far too many of us develop sermons and ideas and build buildings. And while we say it's for the people, it's also for the celebration and admiration of your peers. And then you discover that you sitting around hanging around with folk who are more depressed than you. And you going, geesh, you can't help me. And so I better figure it out. And it's crazy. I think the genius of innovative pastors, and Dee said it, is, despite age, despite all that, this sense to emerge and evolve, and even to acknowledge that you were not willing to grow in other seasons. You were willing to maintain. Mm-hmm. And so now if you maintain, you die. My time for the Bible. In 2 Kings, it talks about the 3 men at the gate. That's right. I know the Bible too, sir.
Okay. Go right ahead. I want to hear this.
At 2 Kings, I think it's chapter 7, might be chapter 6. I don't know what chapter it is, but it's a chapter 2 Kings. And it's funny, the 3 men are there and the leopards, the 4 leopards. And they say, if we go back to the city, we die. But if we stay here, we die. And I think that I think the joy of this season, and again, any pastor listening to us, what you need to grasp is that if you're not optimistic, you create a faithless people.
Ooh.
If you're not optimistic in this season, you create a faithless people, because you've got to at least model for them that not only is there a God beyond the pandemic, but there's a God in the pandemic that's calling you to do incredible, amazing things. We've got to stop claiming that God is great and then only require God to give us the victories that are good for our ego. Some victories is in what you survive, not in what you fix.
Yes, sir.
That's an interesting thing. I think that one of the, some of the mistakes, and I'm going to throw these out, and you all can just kind of jump in, and I'll just kind of read these off. And you mentioned this before about the failure to build creative approaches to ministry, little to no investment in technology and social media, little to no. I knew pastors that didn't even have a Facebook page. GM has a Facebook page. Not cultivating a younger cadre of leaders. Letting your young adults with all of this energy and skill sit on the sideline or sing in your choir, but not put them in responsible leadership positions so that they can help you bring about the evolution in the ministry that you need. Just a real mismanagement of the moment, and the failure to, and you've talked about this a lot, John, just not perceiving the movement of God and or yielding to pandemic fatigue. I tell people, I'm not tired yet. I'm not tired of the pandemic. I'm not worn out by it. I'm not going to allow myself at this point, to become so fatigued that I just start to give in to the moment, or the idea that I need to go back into the sanctuary too soon, or you don't capitalize on the general. This is a generational shift in ministry. It's a generational shift.
Dr. Guns and Dr. Nelson, you said something amazing, and I know we only got a few minutes, but I really want to tap into this deep. And you talked about one of the failures being that we didn't tap into the moment. We didn't understand that the moment brought its own opportunities of greatness. Mm-hmm. And what's really weird is that the church became celebrity driven, and then the celebrities had no answer.
True.
And so now the big boys, in quotes, were preaching the cameras too.
Right.
And so I'll just throw this out, and I had to remember, so Dr. Guns, you talked about having younger people. Well, there's a young lady right now watching. Her name is Sierra Terrell. I put her on our board of directors. She was 26, 25, something like that, Sierra. She was young, and I put her on the board. Half of our board of directors were under the age of 35. And what's interesting, she started talking about technology shifts 2.5 years ago. So we hired an online connections pastor because of her push 6 months before we went into the pandemic. We were already shifting. And here's what's scary, and I'll, no commercial, but here's what's scary. You two know I've created so much opportunity to do the work. Just even this, do you understand, Pastor, that this is the first time in 35 years that Dr. Jeffrey Guns and Jeffrey Guns' baby brother have done anything like this in ministry? The pandemic birthed the Guns brothers, who for years talked about ideas that now we're doing. Here's the thing. For years, D, you and I talked about doing stuff.
Right.
And now look at us. The three of us are doing this. And it was Dr. Jeffrey Guns who pulled Dr. Sheridan Nelson, Jeffrey Guns' baby brother.
Absolutely.
So for me, the genius of this is that while I'm burying on Tuesday a mother of our church that died of COVID-19 yesterday. Mm. And yet in the midst of all of this, I get a chance to live out dreams and to try stuff. I think if we, again, and I've said this before and I'm done, if we lack optimism, even in death, we don't celebrate resurrection.
Yeah.
So what's been brought to life, not what's died, but what's been brought to life.
And I think if when we look at the alignment to the Bible, isn't that the challenge that every great leader in the scriptures had?
Absolutely.
You know, from Moses to Joshua, the remnant that wanted to go back to Egypt, and then the remnant that was excited about the promised land, and managing and leading in that tension. I believe that's where we are. You know, and you said something, I know we don't have time to exhaust it tonight, Bishop Guns, but the point that you made about, you know, leading forward and the people and the pressure of going back. One of the questions that I have, and I know we can't flush it out tonight, is how do you manage that empathy of having empathy for the persons that want to go back to something that we all know is no longer going to exist, but being empathetic with that remnant of your congregation that longs for that, right? But because we're in it and because we're leading the change, we are passionate and optimistic about the promised land. But what becomes our responsibility to that remnant of our congregation that's empathetic of wanting to return? And I know that's just a question maybe for a later discussion.
Wow.
That's a big question, D.
Yeah, that's a really big question, and I think it's probably one that most of us are going to at some point have to face in terms of dealing with the emotional trauma that some people may have when they come back to their churches, and they find out that, you know, this is not the same thing or the same place, or, you know, the worship is a little different, you know, and we'll talk about that next week, you know, talk about the evolution and the possibilities.
But can I respond to that, Dr.
Sure,
by saying this, D? That's an amazing question.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I think will be the same. He died on Friday, but early Sunday morning.
Yeah, that is true.
I mean, I think we're only talking about the optics, and we're not talking about the content of our message.
Okay.
Because I think, and both of you are masterful preachers. So what's going to get people through it is the one that got them to it.
Mm-hmm.
I got you.
You know what I'm saying? I think we're always worried about the structural stuff, and what people say, it ain't the same church, it's the same God.
Yeah.
And because he ain't changed, Second Calvary and Appleseed will always be incredible places to worship. Because if you bring your own sense of joy, then the mass don't shield your praise. It just protects you from the other person next to you. So I don't think Jesus left the church. I think we left him, and he's saying, come back to me and you'll discover that I've never changed. You are the ones who tried to box me in to what made you feel warm and fuzzy. Now I need you to be healthy and whole. And so, man. So that's a major question, and that needs to be dealt with. And yes, and people are asking, will it be a part 2? And my wife has responded, so it's Second Calvary. There will be a part 2 next week. And y'all need to invite everybody next week, because Dr. Jeffrey Guns and Dr. Sheridan Nelson and Jeffrey Guns' baby brother have a lot to say. So, Dr. Guns, I'm honored to be Jeffrey Guns' baby brother. And see, this way this comes from D. Years ago, me and him, I went to a church thinking I was going to preach, and they meant him and not me. So I was reminded while I was sitting there for an hour listening to him, going, God dog it, I remember Jeffrey Guns' baby brother. And you know what? And it used to bother me. That is the greatest compliment I am Sandra Nick's husband, Alexis, Deja, and Taylor's daddy, and Claude's father-in-law, and Zion and Trey's G daddy, and Jeffrey Gunn's brother. And I am so happy to be Jeffrey Gunn. All right, praise the Lord.
Hey, I really want to thank you guys for joining with us tonight. Thank you, Bishop Guns. Thank you, Dr. Nelson. Next week we're going to
Thank you.
Join us Tuesday night, 9:00, 9 p.m. We're going to really kind of dive into this thing about technology, where people need to be going, the kinds of things that churches need to be thinking about. You know, are there shifts that need to be made in terms of staffing? How do you move your church forward? And what are the kinds of things that people need to be doing and thinking about? So God bless you. Thank you so much for being a part with us. And Bishop Guns, you're going to have the last word. You and Dr. Nelson?
I think Dr. Nelson has the last word. I think
you did it, sir. I yield the floor to Adine. Adine, you have the last word.
He has had the last word.
All right. That's it. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next week. Take care.